if you like this video, I'll know that you want me to tell all of these stories. Hey everybody, Leia here with some really greatly improved lighting. If you're wondering, just recently this past weekend I purchased a ring light, so now I don't have to wait until it's nice and sunny outside to film. I can film in my bedroom when it's kind of dreary and it's 8 a.m. So I decided that this week for you guys, what I would do is, I had originally created something that I was going to call the journalist tag, but I was like, I don't know how many other journalist YouTubers there are here on the platform, so I'm just going to call it like questions about my journalism or something like that. So what I'm going to do is I am going to put the question up on the screen and I'm going to voice over it when I get into my voiceover software, or when I get into my video editing software, and then I'm going to answer the question for you guys. I wrote these questions, so I hope you enjoy, and I thought it would be good, especially right now since I'm transitioning from a journalism job to potentially another journalism job, potentially a job that's not a journalism job. So I just thought it would be a good thing for you guys. Okay, let's get right into the video. First question: when did you become a journalist? I became a journalist in January of 2019. I became a journalist because I saw things that I thought were problematic in my community, and I really wished that I understood why journalists covered the way they covered, why they covered things that I thought were important, why they covered things that I didn't think were important, and why they didn't cover things that I thought were important. My first job was working at the Hawkeye in Burlington, Iowa. I no longer work at the Hawkeye because I have recently been laid off. My first beat was local government, specifically covering the Des Moines County Board of Supervisors. This later expanded into the Burlington City Council and the West Burlington City Council. I also briefly covered the Fort Madison City Council and the Lee County Board of Supervisors, but due to our shrinking staff, I was no longer able to cover those two beats. So the next two questions actually go hand in hand for me. If you're doing this and you worked at a bigger paper, they may not go hand in hand for you, but the next two questions are, what was your first story and what was your first story on the front page? And these are actually, I think, the same answer, and that is, I wrote a story called For Some, A Cold Day on the Job, which was talking about how 3 days after I moved to Burlington, we had the coldest day on record for like 50 years. It was like a wind chill of like -70, and talking about the people who still had to work. So like pizza delivery drivers, I think they were mailmen or mail people that still had to work, and so that was a really fun story. Alternatively, if this question was meant to be my first centerpiece, which is like the main story, my first centerpiece was actually either on the auditor's office, where I was profiling what the auditor's office did and why they wanted more staff, or it was on a musical program where someone told the story of the Civil War using musical instruments. I think that those two stories were on the same day. One of them was the lead, which is kind of the story that doesn't have photo, but it's the first story on the page. And one of them was I believe, was the actual centerpiece. So it was one of those two stories. It's also possible that they were centerpiece stories on different days in the same week, but I know those were definitely my first big stories. The next question here is, what was your first big story? And I'm going to say that my first big story was probably the initial DESCOM double billing story. I'm going to make a whole video about DESCOM, but basically it was talking about how the 911 system in Des Moines County was supposed to be billed to all county residents, or it was supposed to be billed, specifically this portion of it was only supposed to be billed to rural residents. It was billed to all residents, and that's when I had a brief outline of saying, like, it's probably around $750,000. Now, it ended up being closer to $1.1 million, but at that time, I just barely had enough numbers to put it together, and it was the 1.1 million. I mean, it was the $750,000, so that was definitely my first big story. And I'm thinking that story was in March or April of 2019. Have you ever made a big change because of your reporting, and if so, what? Yes. So the biggest change that I have made in the community because of my reporting is DESCOM, that it was switched from being billed where each citizen paid for it on either their city taxes or rural residents paid for it on their county taxes. There's a separate portion of county taxes that are the equivalent of city taxes, but for county residents. So it went from that system to be billed to all county residents on their county taxes. So that was a pretty big change. It saved the city of Burlington something like, just shy of $1 million a year, and it lowered the levy rate by about 90 cents. So that was a really big change. My favorite story was a story that I did just a couple of months ago. It was about the library moving towards inclusion. And I am really big about not just wanting inclusion to be including kids with autism, but including kids in wheelchairs, making sure that black kids see black characters, making sure that kids with gay parents see gay parents, making sure that everybody sees themselves and everybody has a way to be represented and included. And it was really neat because I was able to tell the story of our library and how our library was doing that. That story got picked up by the Associated Press, and then our library was actually on a podcast talking about what they did for accessibility. So I thought that was really neat, and that was definitely my favorite story to do. What is my most popular article? This is not a hard one. My most popular article was the article where I announced that it's one of two articles about the same thing. It was either the article where I announced that an American Airlines affiliate was going to be providing service to the Burlington airport, or alternatively, it was the article where I announced that the American Airlines affiliate, which was called Cape Air, was going to be pulling out of Burlington for providing air service. Those two things were both, very easily, they were both the biggest stories I ever wrote. Yes, Burlington, despite being 25,000 people, does have its own airport, a commercial airport, and so it was a really big deal for people that we were, number one, getting an American Airlines affiliate, because it made things a lot easier. Like, we could book on AmericanAirlines.com for different places, so we didn't have to leave security and come back, which I did have to do when I went to Mayo Clinic. It was a huge hassle, took a lot of time, very stressful. So it was a really big deal. And then also when they announced that they were pulling out, that was equally a big deal. So this is a fun story. There was actually a week where my boss was gone. She was on vacation, so I was running the paper and also writing stories. So I would write stories, and then I would have to leave for the day to go cover things. And so I was writing a story, I think it was about COVID-19, because I know that it had our emergency management director and our public health director. And at that point, I was writing my stories in the system instead of writing them in Google Docs and then pasting them into the system. So I was writing things, so I would have like, Gina goes here, or a quote goes here, as filler, because I knew what I wanted the article to say. Yes, sometimes that happens where you're informing people about, I think this was like COVID-19 vaccines becoming available, because this was in early 2021. So I knew what the article was going to be about, and I had all of the main stuff in there. I just had placeholder text in there, and for some reason, that story ran in the paper, but not online. So the finished version ran online, but for some reason in the paper, an incomplete version ran. I wasn't able to look at the proof, because I was gone or something like that. And so I was like, yeah, so it ran in the paper like that. It was so embarrassing, such a big mistake. But, yeah, I learned to not automatically put things in the system after that. I learned to write things in Google Docs and then put them in the system as a final draft. What story had the most impact on you? The story that had the most impact on me, I'm going to be telling in a future video, but the story that had the biggest impact on me was the officer-involved shooting of Caleb Peterson. It gave me PTSD. It made me cry quite a bit, and even to this day I have a difficult time explaining to people why it is that this story is so important, so impactful, and why it's important that we tell stories of everyone that are killed by people in officer-involved shootings, not just people that we determine to have, been more innocent than others, why it's important to tell all of the stories. What was your first Eyes on the Ground article? My first Eyes on the Ground article was another one that contributed to the PTSD, and that is when I went to a triple fatality on a train wreck. It was about 30 minutes away from the newsroom. I had to drive out there. I had to park like a quarter mile away from the actual accident because this was on like a back road where there aren't very many spots to pull off, and they barricade that entire block, but an entire block can be like half a mile. So the entire block was barricaded, so I had to walk quite a ways. It was difficult because I did see a dead body. They were covered by tarps, but it was windy that day, and so I did see the hand. It was a very difficult story for me. At the time, I thought that children were killed. Thankfully, there were no children killed. I do believe that the people killed were parents, which is very difficult because that means that someone's mom, they were all three of them, so someone's mom didn't come home. And if you want me to make a video about that accident and what I learned about train safety from that day, please comment down below, or actually just like this video. If you like this video, I'll know that you want me to tell all of these stories. Have you received any accolades? If so, what? Yes, I received an award recently in April for my coverage of the Devontae Davis murder trial. It was a self-defense murder trial involving a racial slur, and essentially whether or not a racial slur provokes enough fear in someone to justify a shooting. It's a little bit more complicated than that, and again, I will tell the story if you guys want, but I did receive an award for covering that murder trial. That was quite special because, as far as I'm aware, we were in the biggest category, and of the 3 award winners, I was the only one that, number 1, won the award by myself and not as a collaborative, and number 2, won the award for a series specifically for covering a single murder trial. So that was a pretty big deal for me. Have I ever interviewed anyone famous? Or who is the most famous person you've interviewed? I think that for me, the most famous person that I've interviewed would definitely be Elizabeth Warren. If I can figure out how, I'm going to pop a photo right here. She was my first famous interview. Well, actually, I may have... No, I think Deb Lobsack was the first famous person that I interviewed. She would have been the second. I interviewed her Memorial Day of 2019 when she came to campaign in Burlington, and we just had a really good conversation overall. I think I still have the audio of that conversation somewhere. And yeah, actually, my old intro, I used to have a photo, I believe, of when I interviewed Elizabeth Warren in my old intro. So that was pretty cool, and she's definitely the most famous person I've ever interviewed. And the last question that I have on here is, what was your favorite recurring story? I think my favorite recurring story would have to be Board of Supervisors stories. Anytime that the Board of Supervisors had a really big ongoing project, especially the ARPA stuff. So I didn't get to see ARPA to completion. Oh, ARPA means the American Relief Plan Act, or American Rescue Plan Act. There we go, American Rescue Plan Act. And that was my favorite recurring story, I think, just because the county had this $7 million that they had to figure out what to do with. They haven't completely decided. I may or may not be going to talk to the supervisors eventually to tell them that they need to make sure that they actually give money to this really important program that they're considering, which is a playground for the citizens in Burlington, or not just for citizens in Burlington, that's the important thing. Playground in Burlington for those with disabilities, but it's not just an accessible playground, it's an inclusive playground, so there's stuff for children with disabilities and also for able-bodied children. There's going to be some autism components, some sensory components put in there. It's quite important, and it's really interesting to see, okay, this county has all this money, has basically half a year worth of property taxes. What the heck do we do with it? And everybody wants a piece of the pie, so it's like, how do they split up the pie? I did a really fun story where it was called Everything That the Supervisors Are Considering Giving ARPA Money To, where I explained what it was, what the justification was, who proposed it, and how likely it seemed that it would get the money. That was a really fun story. Not my favorite, but definitely a fun one to do. Okay guys, well that was this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I thought that it was kind of fun to look back over my career. I mentioned a whole bunch of stories, a whole bunch of things, and just know, this video, I'm not quite sure how long it is, but I know my videos are normally around 10 minutes, and 10 minutes cannot encapsulate an entire career. I don't know how 10 minutes can encapsulate what I did over the course of 3.5 years, but this is a little taste of what I did in my life as a journalist. I realized that I have made a lot of disability related content. Recently I've made a lot of content of chronic illness stuff, and of course I have my research videos, but I wanted to do something that's a little bit more journalistic for you guys, and so that's that. I will be hopefully coming up with a couple of behind the story videos, and we'll see how those go. We'll see whether or not you guys like them. I'm really trying to tailor my content to what you guys like. Yes, I want to do what I like, but there's so many things that I like. I want to do what you guys like. That's why I'm focusing more on diabetes and biliary dyskinesia, and eventually, once it's confirmed, GERD and gastritis, because I want to do what you guys are interested in, not just what I love. I love all of this stuff. I love making videos in general, and if I can take what I love and what you love and make it into something great, that's what I want to do. Alright. Bye, guys.